Communication tools. Communication tools. No tool will make you safe. Communication tools. Communication tools. No tool will make you safe. Communication tools can help you have more fruitful communication.
In this clip from a Metatopia panel, McGay Baker emphasizes her prioritizing communication tools over safety tools. Communication and consent form a pillar of Powered by the Apocalypse design. Vincent Baker goes so far as to say he would prioritize consent over any other goals in play.
Apocalypse World, you say what honesty demands, and it's very important to that game that you always say what honesty demands, and that you be forthcoming about the game. And these ridiculous games, I love these games, they're really fun. But what I want to say is that I'm not going to mess with consent. You know, for my purposes, consent is more valuable than any game.
And this episode highlights the Apocalypse World model of consent. But before I dig into that topic, I'd like to tell a little bit about my history with the Baker's Games and where Powered by the Apocalypse, PBTA, stands in the world of game design.
So in the Mountain Territory, there are these isolated, faithful towns. You will play dogs, God's watchdogs, whose job is to travel from town to town, delivering the mail, sharing the news, giving the latest prophecies that the prophets and the elders pass on to you, keeping the faith together as a body. You're young men who've been chosen, who've grown up faithful, who've been chosen to do this very important work. Young men meaning 18, 19, 20-year-old young men.
Vincent Baker was providing exposition for his game, Dogs in the Vineyard, which he was running on the YouTube channel Hostile Work Environment. The game involves Mormon cowboys traveling from town to town, solving problems. It might not be available anymore, I'm not sure, but running Dogs in the Vineyard transformed RPGs for me.
Your dungeon master has placed you in a dreadfully precarious position. You're playing the most phenomenal game ever created. Your skin grows cold from your first glimpse of the enormous beast. It's a product of your imagination. Survival depends on a quick, decisive move. Your choices are limited. Stand and fight, or run. Use your lightning bolt.
Once upon a time, I was a fuckhead in college. I started the D&D club at my school. The club centered around a large game with 3 GMs simultaneously running in a shared setting. We played once a week, and in terms of logistics, coordinating the 20-plus players was one of the greatest feats I had pulled off up to that point. The edition was 3.5, and I was so locked into that system. I could design characters and encounters that dealt game-breaking amounts of damage. I uncovered interactions where the system fell apart. I took on min-maxers that were working towards PhDs in mathematics. And honestly, I was so tired. I actually did not care for the rule puzzles, and I did not care for the way the game halted when anybody pushed on the rules. What I was looking for was telling compelling stories with my friends and describing weird, fantastical images in the shared imaginary space.
Head swap.
I don't remember how I stumbled upon these sites. I was called to them. The Forge and Story Games. These sites hold a certain amount of notoriety now, due to key figures having terrible takes. But to me, these were where I discovered a world of gaming that was so much bigger than the narrow possibilities of D&D. They fostered heady conversations where Post attempted to systematize RPGs, creating a framework for understanding and creating play experiences. This is where I discovered Dogs in the Vineyard. I brought it to my club, invited a group over to my house for a mini campaign. I narrated the game while playing cowboy melodies on my acoustic guitar, and the new narrative-focused play brought affects beyond frustration, level gain, and big numbers. The characters were enmeshed in each other's lives, working through complex and deeply human moments.
Do you see me, Tokara? Do you see me, man? Born with a steel in his hand, and in his foot is the Night Rider, cruising at the speed of light.
It was in spaces like the Forge and story games that the foundation of Apocalypse World was set. Apocalypse World took the concept of moves from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons and it twisted them. Instead of each move representing a specific attack or spell, a move in Apocalypse World is more like the evocation of a trope from a narrative. If that trope is reinforced or subverted depends on the dice and the interpretation of the result by the players. The name of the game embodies the setting.
How will mankind's reign on Earth meet its end? Someday the human race might be just more dust in the universe. Will it be through natural disaster, global war, or something far more ominous? Our darkest nightmares coming true. A plague of infected cannibals sweeping the earth.
The setting of Apocalypse World is brutal, violent, grotesque. The rules they embrace sex. And in turn, you can see where the bakers find an added need for consent and communication within their system. In contemporary story game culture, it is the norm to provide safety tools for play. Every time I organize a game, I start off by giving everyone the opportunity, either publicly or silently, to communicate any lines or veils that they don't want to cross. These are things that they either don't want to see in the game or want to have in the background of the game. In addition to this, I provide an X card. This is a 3x5 card with an X drawn on it in the center of the table. If, during play, any player reaches out and touches the X card, that's a signal to everybody else that we're rewinding the scene and taking it in a different direction.
Communication tools. Communication tools. No tool will make you safe. Communication tools can help you have more fruitful communication.
Returning to McGay Baker's clip from the beginning of this episode, she's saying communication tools. She's saying it like a protest, insisting that safety tools will never keep you safe, but communication tools can enable consent in play. I don't have the same full-throated disinterest in safety tools. I've personally benefited from their use where something really fucked up happened to me a week before I played a game, and I just did not want to encounter that same thing in the game I was playing. What I am interested in is consent, and I find Apocalypse World attempt to create consensual interactions in the rules to be very compelling. I don't think it quite delivers on what it's trying to do, but I think it's gesturing towards something very interesting.
Back in the early days of 2004, 2005, 2006, this slogan that got tossed around the Forge, which was the GM describes your successes and you describe your failures. And there were a number of games that came out of the Forge that worked that way, and Apocalypse World is one of them. The way the structure works is it's the person who is on the receiving end of the grief, whatever the grief is, who makes decisions about the grief, who describes what's going on, and who can consent to it or can withhold consent seamlessly without saying, I object to that. Instead, I own that, and it plays out in a way that is acceptable to me. And then these are all, always say what honesty demands by the player and against the character. Choose when to roll the dice. These are different ways that Apocalypse World maintains those systems of consent and communication. Do you want to say more about that?
I want to say one quick thing, which is that every piece of this is unpacking the whole toolbox of what PBTA is and how it works. And that if you look at this, this is a set of here with the consent and communication tools that we have laid out. Always say what honesty demands, et cetera, reverse who's vulnerable, explode a single outcome into an array of options. These are aspects of that tool. Each of these are a tool.
Yeah. These are different ways.
It doesn't mean you have to do all these things, but definitely do some of them so that there is a baseline of consent and communication and agency on the part of your players.
PBTA popularized a resolution system that has 3 types of results: a bad result, a mixed result, and a success. Essentially what the Bakers are describing here is the negative things resulting from a roll should be described, narrated, owned by the person who's experiencing the worst aspect of that result. And I think that's very interesting. I think when you give players the opportunity to describe their failures, to describe the bad things that happen, they're going to both give you a result that fits their view of their character, it fits the type of story they want to tell, it fits the type of experience they want to have at the table. And also, they have the most intimate knowledge of their characters, and they can go for the hardest hitting, most emotionally resonant outcomes that could be had at the table.
Usually, if I hand, oh my God, something went terribly wrong, how did it go wrong? You're going to hand me something more cool than what I would have narrated to what terrible things happened to you. That's just an observed thing that I find to be true.
It kind of goes back to the GM describes your successes and you describe your failures.
Yep.
The other thing is hidden. So in Apocalypse World, that works the same way whether it's a player character or an NPC, but the instructions I have as the GM are different. The player is going to make a choice from their own needs and their own position. But as the GM, I'm instructed to make my NPCs sort of directed and aggressive and fixed in their sort of path, in their own vision. And so as the GM, I don't care about these characters as much. I don't and my
the NPCs.
The NPCs, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And my job is not to save Dremmer's life or whatever. And so when you do that, Dremmer is more likely to make the aggressive choice just because of as the GM, my different relationship with the players. And so that's sort of a subtle difference because only the GM really sees it, but it's structured right into Apocalypse World that the player has freedom when they need it, and the GM can do the aggressive thing.
I
in that
wanna-
moment. Suffer the violence that the player would not necessarily choose to suffer.
The ways that this could be transferred to other role-playing games is obvious. Simple isometric transformation. You're taking this idea of players owning the most brutal things that happen to them, and you're just applying it to other systems. You roll under your DC in a D20 game, then the player gets to describe that bad thing that happens to them, not the GM. What I'm more curious about is, can this be applied to other game systems? A miniature game, a card game, a board game. Can a system handle this where there isn't as much play in the shared imaginary space? There are games out there that you don't even need to know the other person to play. Actually, I think this is the norm for most games that we have. If you sit down to play chess, you don't need to know the other person at all. You just start moving the pieces, and they start moving their pieces. And as long as you're following the rules and behaving yourself, the game can happen. You don't even need to speak the same language as the other player. Most games are this style of low communication game, while on the other hand, role-playing games are high communication games. They require you to create an understanding of the expectations of the other players in order to have a successful game. You're playing a miniature skirmish game. Your models are painted up, they're on the table, they're skulking, they're fighting, they're shooting. It's your turn. You activate one of your models. You make that roll. You're shooting at one of the other models. You hit. It would be very unusual to pass the agency over to that player and say, I'm shooting at you. How do you want this to resolve? Because in most game situations, the players are instructed to optimize towards scoring points, towards being first, towards winning. This really leans on a disruption of the style of play where the game is optimizing towards those outcomes and instead transition towards optimizing towards an aesthetic experience. It's optimizing towards creating poetry. It's optimizing towards having something evocative, emotional, something that's exciting, something that's a story, something that's beautiful.